On this episode of If You Can, I'm speaking to three-time Olympic gold medalist and one of the fastest swimmers in the world, Dean MBE. But standing on top of the podium isn't where this story really starts. Because just months before winning gold in Tokyo, Tom was hit with COVID, twice, leaving his preparation in chaos and his Olympic dream hanging in the balance. He went from uncertainty to the biggest stage in sport. So what does it take to perform when everything leading up to the moment has gone wrong? And how do you stay calm when the pressure is at its absolute peak? Well, today I'm visiting Tom at his swim club to find out. I'm Louis Alexander. Welcome to If You Can. Tom, welcome to If You Can. It's an absolute honour to sit down with you today, somewhere which I think is very close to your heart, somewhere you've probably spent tens of thousands of hours training here in Maidenhead. So thank you for having us.
No, thank you.
Let's start strong. I know your time is very valuable, and a bit like in the pool, we don't want to waste a second. At 25 years old, you hold 3 Olympic golds. You are England's most decorated athlete at the Commonwealth Games, and also, which I think is just as incredible, you are also the owner of the Tom Dean Swim Schools, and you teach and empower young people out there to learn one of the most important life skills, to swim. At 25 years old. What's the secret?
Oh, well, when you put it like that, that's quite something. It's interesting because even, talking about, winning Olympic gold medals and being Olympic champion, sometimes when I go to competitions around the world, when I walk out to my race, they'll announce me as, triple Olympic champion. And sometimes I kind of catch myself expecting someone else to walk out. But what's the secret to all that? I think constantly moving forward. I never try and look back and think, I've achieved this, I can kind of rest on my laurels slightly. I think always knowing, wanting to put one foot in front of the other without sounding too cliched. I think probably a work ethic and a sense of drive that I owe to my upbringing and my parents and my siblings. Constantly wanting to kind of be the best version of myself. I think that's something I actually hold really kind of quite dear. How can I absolutely get the best version of whatever I'm trying to do in front of me, whether it's, like you said, a competition, whether it's business, whether it's even in my personal life as well. That's something I really, really strive for. But I always think I don't quite want to ever take my foot off the gas, not until I'm quite a bit older, I think, and I can put my performance and my competitive career behind me. But it's a combination of factors, and a lot of factors that are down to people around me and not just from myself.
But that mindset is why you're the best, and that's what we're going to get into in this conversation. I think it's important to introduce too, we are from quite different worlds. You are a professional athlete who is at the best in the world at what you do. I come from an adventure background. I am one of the world's youngest professional adventurers and lucky to hold a few world records for my adventures and expeditions, but I'm certainly not an athlete. And what I'd like to do today is try and understand your athlete mindset, because I know everyone has a slightly different one, to see if I can bring that into my adventures, to see if anyone listening out there can bring it into their life in school, at university, in business, whatever it may be. Those successes that we've just mentioned in the pool, in business, in life, that's a lot to handle for anyone, but let alone at 25 years old. How have you learned to process that at such a young age? And what's been some of the most difficult moments, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And when you asked that, I think a moment that really sprung to my mind was I went to my first Olympics when I was 21 years old. And at that point, I due to COVID and due to my age, I hadn't won many medals on the international stage. I was still a relatively unknown athlete. I knew what I was doing in the pool, and I knew how my times compared to the rest of the world. And I was kind of excited to show actually my world ranking, what I could do. But I wasn't expecting to go to my first Olympics and win two gold medals, an individual gold medal, and the relay as well. And when you do that, I think I became a cohort of one of 5, male individual Olympic champions from Great Britain. And we're swimmers, we're not footballers or movie stars. You're not expecting to get stopped walking down the street or get recognised when you're out and about, or have people asking you for photos, or all the various opportunities that come off the back of winning the Olympic Games. But I remember when I returned home from Tokyo at 21, funnily enough, I came home here to Maidenhead. I drove down my street and there was a massive street party festival, which was just crazy. And it was kind of day one of this completely different life that I was starting to lead. I mean, worlds apart from anything I'd ever experienced before. But I had this incredible, welcome home party, which was really special. There were TV cameras and photographers and all this kind of incredible, just overwhelming level of attention that I hadn't quite expected. But once that had all died down, I remember I sat down with my mum. We sat on our balcony that evening, and it was pitch black. It was the middle of the night, and first of all, my mum just checked in on me. She was like, she hadn't had a moment, just me and her, to chat since coming back. And she said, "Are you okay? How are you dealing with all this?" And then she was like, "Look, your life's going to be quite different. Essentially, part of you is now public property. Essentially, you're in the public eye, and that has to influence all your decisions going forward." She's always said, and I draw on her as a real source of inspiration. I've got 4 siblings, so I'm one of 5, and we've all gone down these different routes. And she's always said, the achievements aren't what impresses her; it's our conduct, and it's how we hold ourselves in daily life and how we interact with other people. And she came back to that point and said, "Look, you're going to have this immense level of pressure. You are going to have people who are, 99% of people are absolutely lovely and super positive and very supportive, but you're always going to have that 1% as well, because you are, in the public eye. And it's also going to come with a degree of pressure, because you are now the only person in the world who has a chance to become defending Olympic champion in that event. You have a career ahead of you where you're at a fork in the road, in that you can, go down all the glitz and glam and the incredible opportunities that come off the back of winning the Olympics, or you can do what you do and do what's right and get your head down and focus on the Commonwealth Games next year, the World Champs the year after, and then the next Olympic Games. And it's quite a pivotal moment at 21 years old to try and wrap your head around that, especially as a swimmer, which is, like I said, a sport that's not synonymous with kind of glitz and glam and public, recognition. So to deal with that, was quite tough. I wouldn't lie. I can't lie. And I think you have to grow up quite fast, at that point, and you have to think, okay, I now need to make a decision to be an adult quite quickly. I know 21 is an adult, but people are still figuring out what they're doing. And yeah, it was just like, okay, this is now my opportunity to make, my life what I want it to be. And this is a genuine fork in the road. And that conversation with my mum on the balcony, the first night after Tokyo, just sticks in my mind so clearly as the start of a kind of a really interesting chapter.
It's incredible. And you're right, as an athlete, that you come with that responsibility, don't you, of everything outside of the pool. And I've achieved 1% of, the media success that you have, if that. But I've experienced a little bit that those, almost distractions are important. The idea of working with sponsors and brands and press and doing the radio or TV, whatever it is, it's very important, because that's how we highlight our work. That's how we encourage the younger generation, right? It's so important. It's pivotal to what we do as in anyone who does any kind of sport. But it is a distraction. Let's be honest. How difficult is it to find that balance when you're still in the peak of your career? And how do you, on a personal, I'd love to know this to help myself. How do you find that balance of how much to open it in, to let in those distractions, to be aware of them, but also when you go into training mode and you're in that camp mode, you shut them off? Is it black and white?
It's a really good question. I think the nature of the sport as well, because we can start talking about the finances of it. Like I said, we're not Premier League footballers. We have to make a living outside of the sport, because if you win the Olympics, you get top band funding, but that's 28k a year, and once you add in camps, rent, food, bills, all this kind of stuff, that doesn't go too far actually. So we need to make a living outside of our sport. I want to be able to, reap the benefits of the work I've put in, absolutely. But you're right, these are distractions. And I would be lying if I sat here and said I've always got it right. I remember leading up to Paris Olympics 2024, when you do start working with partners and sponsors. We were speaking just before we started recording. I'm fortunate enough to work with a brand like Omega, which are incredible. And in terms of, I know, on brand exactly. But as an athlete, I think because they're synonymous with sport, they really understand what it takes, when to push and when not to push. But inevitably working with different brands and various commitments on your time, there is a balance whereby you need to earn a living, you need to get your name out there. That's part of it. You have to have a presence. At the same time, you have to have a social media presence as well. So that has to be on your mind. At the same time, training and performance has to be the priority, because without that, you don't get this. Also in a sport like swimming, you have to be there 6 days a week, 10 sessions a week in the pool, 3 gym, everything else. It's a really time intensive sport. And I remember in the lead up to Paris 2024, which is when brands and opportunities really want to start activating those 6 months leading up to it. That's the most important 6 months. But at the same time, you're like, okay, I need to kind of sow the seeds for hopefully some Olympic success and really use it as a springboard and all these various things. And I got it. I did get it wrong, because I thought I can do it all. I can do it all. I can fill my days. I can go max in on the training. I can do every opportunity that comes across my desk. And between the time commitments, between the pressure of going in and trying to defend an Olympic title. I probably stretched myself too thin, and it comes with hindsight. I can sit here and say that now. No one has ever defended a 200 meter freestyle Olympic title. It's never been done. Michael Phelps didn't do it. Ian Thorpe didn't do it. It's never ever been done. So in the lead up to Paris, I was the only person in the world that had the opportunity to do something that's never been done. And I think the weight of expectation, the pressure, the kind of the brands and working with these other organizations, like you said, distractions, the actual media hype leading up to it that I didn't have in the lead up to the last Olympics. I think I didn't quite give it the attention and respect that it deserved, and I think I suffered because of it. And I think that was one of my reasons for finishing Paris and saying, look, I need to take a bit of a step away, and I'm going to take a couple of months just to switch off from the sport. And I threw myself into the swim school and into business as in my next endeavour. But yeah, it's a really, really fine line that you've got to tread. But you know what I keep coming back to as I look at my heroes in the sport and my heroes in life, and I look at Chris Hoy, Steve Redgrave, these absolute legends of the sport, Michael Phelps, and I think, okay, what makes these people my hero? Well, their sole driver and focus was performance. I look at Steve Redgrave, and unfortunately we live in a world where social media is a really important part of what we do now. I went to Leander Club today over in Henley to go and watch my brother train. He's a rower over there. And Sir Steve Redgrave is an absolute hero of mine, and he's plastered all over the walls, and rightly so. And I'm thinking, off the back of his Atlanta 96 gold medal, he didn't go on Instagram Live and start putting a post up. And I know that things are different now and we have to have a brand and be public facing and all that kind of stuff. But he was so driven and focused for 20 years, 5 Olympic cycles, just on performance and getting his head down. And that's what cemented his name in the history books. And that's something that I've been fortunate enough, I think, with my performance, my success, I guess you could say, and some of the work I have done, I'm in a bit more of a position now where I can tread that balance quite finely. And we mentioned my agent Hugo. He's a really close friend and kind of a business partner of mine, and he understands that balance, which is important.
Well, that's important, right? Having the right team around you, but also learning from our mistakes. Yeah. I've made many myself, working with different sponsors and brands, and distraction is not necessarily a bad word. It's just a word to show that actually it's a different commitment. You use the word commitment there. It's a different job. It's a different responsibility to doing, in your case, swimming, in my case, the running or the adventures or whatever it may be. We mentioned a little bit there about Tokyo 2021, and that was your Olympic debut. Yep. And on your Olympic debut, you won, 2 medals, but the first one was the individuals. Yep. If possible, I'd love to, because I'm fascinated by this and the mindset around Olympic athlete, the 4 years of training and, probably longer, right? It's your life of training to get to that one moment, that one day, that, in your case, 1 minute, was it 44?
44, yeah.
On the 27th of July, 2021.
Absolutely.
So what I'd love to do is I'd love to break it down almost into 4 chapters. I'd love to go through the build up to it and, of course, the impact of getting COVID twice and how that impacted your preparation. And then I'd love to break down the day, the pre, the race itself, and the post, and not just necessarily the technical side, but your mindset, your fears, your pressures, everything around it. So can we start with the build up, those few months before?
Yeah, of course. No, the build up. So everyone knows the pandemic was around that time. The Olympics got postponed by a year. So I joined the Bath National Centre at 18 in 2018. I'd started studying mechanical engineering, and I was building up towards the 2020 Olympics. That was my sole focus. And I was just doing anything that was thrown at me. I came from a small club here at Maidenhead. So when I went to a national training centre, it was like, it's like a kid in a sweet shop. You have nutritionists and physios and psychologists and a strength and conditioning coach, all these people who are just there to make you better at swimming. And I was like, this is incredible. I just need to absolutely commit and have this work ethic. And I've got this whole team around me and an incredible coach in Dave McNulty who's going to guide me through it. So I worked really, really hard, really, really grafted. I was seeing some fantastic improvements. I was really chuffed with where I was. And then COVID hit in March of 2020 and the Olympics got postponed. That was the first big setback for me. And I did find that quite tough. Lockdown, going out on cycle rides, everyone knows kind of the story. But we got back into swimming that summer. Started to build up, and what was frustrating is I'd had this great year. The start of the season leading into 2020 had gone really, really well. No injury, no illness. Now, every athlete, and you'll know better than anyone else, when you're building up towards something that big and that physically demanding, injury and illness are every athlete's worst nightmare. So to have a season free of both of those is fantastic. When it got postponed, the dice had to be rolled again, and I thought I'm starting a new season with the risk of those two things that could potentially hamper any performances. September, I get my first case of COVID, sets me back, isolation, 10 days, slow build up, very gradual return to training process because they're being really cautious because all the unknown effects of the virus at that point. Started to build back up and then came back in January, February time and got hit with my second bout of COVID. Now, we have our Olympic trials are in April before the Olympics every year. So April 2021, April 2024, there'll be in April 2028 before Los Angeles. And I sat there in January, February time, isolating at home, really, really struggling with this illness, a massive setback. And I'm there thinking, I've not proved myself. I've got nothing to fall back on here. An athlete only gets 2 Olympics, maybe if they're lucky in their lifespan. I was like, this is starting to potentially scupper one of my 2 Olympics. And like you said, I'd trained for 15 years at that point. It's a horrible position to be in, and I was really, and because it affected, your lungs and your breathing, I'm thinking this is, what I rely on and all this kind of stuff. And I remember sitting down with my coach basically after that second bout of COVID. And I remember saying, like, Dave, do you think I can do it? Basically, do you think I can qualify? And he said, you can, but everything between now and the Olympics, and now between trials and now and the Olympics, has to be absolutely perfect. You can't have a day off. There can be no chink in your armor. You can't have an afternoon where you take it slightly easier. You can't have a session where you take your foot off the gas. Everything has to be perfect. And I did feel like I'd been given a second chance at that point, or even a third chance. Got to the trials, qualified, and I remember thinking, right, I've got between April and the 27th of July 2021 to just have this incredible block of training where I feel like a person reborn, because I can just make sure that everything I do, and I speak about this, I've done talks in the past where I talk about kind of high performance, but then real peak performance. And I've started to find tweaks in everything I did. I slept for longer, I recovered better, I watched what I did on a weekend, what I ate down to the finest detail. There's a level of performance that my coach calls it the Olympic shift. You can't maintain it for 4 years straight, but you can click into it when you have to. Mm-hmm. I imagine it's the same in the final bits of prep for a big challenge that you face, but you click into this higher level of performance. And looking back on it now, I was so frustrated when the Olympics got postponed, when I got these bouts of COVID, and I just remember it feeling really unfair, and it felt like things weren't just. And I remember my dad saying, look, he always says that some of your worst days can be your best. And I think if the Olympics hadn't been postponed for a year, I think that extra year of training probably helped me. At the end of the day, when I won the 200 freestyle at the Olympics, I won by 4/100ths of a second. So, I fully believe that an extra year of training and prep probably helped me and allow me to get my hand on the wall first. That bout of COVID and shifting into this higher level of performance I didn't know I could actually access and tap into probably helped me. These are all big learnings that I've taken on, and I think that run in those last 6 months between COVID and the Olympic Games, that's the best 6 months of training I've ever done, I think.
That's incredible. I love that word, Olympic shift. Do you think there's a lesson out there for anyone listening who never goes to the Olympics? Maybe they just watch it from home, and they could be a musician, a up-and-coming artist, anything in the world. Is there something they can embrace there in their own lives, or maybe someone like myself as an adventurer?
100%. I think I talk about, sometimes when I speak about kind of gaining confidence and stuff and how you have that confidence, I think if you can, honestly look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and say, I gave everything. Every part of my day was exactly how it should have been and got the best out of it. This is coming back to the point I said earlier about wanting to really get the best out of myself, and that being a real core driver. Then that builds confidence because you're making promises to yourself and you're upholding them, and that's super important. And I'm not saying that, like you said, you have to be an Olympic athlete, you have to be this top level. But I think setting yourself goals and challenges and sticking to them and being honest and being, vulnerable to actually be able to say, yes, I did that, or no, I did fall short. I think they're important things to make that Olympic shift. And knowing that, like my mum always says, you will expand to fill the demands put upon you, whether that's with work, whether when I was at university or when I'm training, you will take it upon yourself to expand to fill these demands upon you. So yeah, I think the Olympic shift, it's interesting when I talk about it to people, because people say, well, why don't you just do that all the time? And I try to get across how brutal that is and how draining that really is. I live a clean life. I eat well, I don't drink, I sleep well during my normal training block, because you just have to do that to survive a week of training. But there's a level above that everything gets looked at through the lens of, is this going to make me swim quicker or not swim quicker? My bottle of water, am I staying hydrated? have I walked to do this interview? Am I going to be recovered enough for tomorrow? What's my sleep plan tonight? Do I know, am I getting the right nutrition when I get every decision of your day is looked through that lens, and it's a shift that you have to make and you can make in the lead up to Olympics. You can't live like that all the time though. You know, and I do think knowing that you have the ability to click into that high level is something that everyone can do and is really valuable.
Sitting here in front of an actual Olympian, especially one as decorated as Tom Dean, is an incredible experience for me. And I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as I am. I do just want to take a moment to acknowledge Bob, our sponsor for the show. Bob was founded by Mike, Max and Will, and it's a reusable body wash for men. I'd like to take a moment to give them a mention because without their belief in me, I would not be sat opposite someone I admire so much. In fact, it'd be great if you could show Bob some support too. I've put a link in the description of this episode, and I'd really appreciate if you could give it a click and take a look at the incredible work they're doing. Not only does Bob smell great, you can travel with it in your hand luggage. It's better for the environment and it's made with no nasty ingredients. I'd like to say another big thank you to Mike, to Max and to Will for their belief in If You Can. I'm so proud to have them on board as a sponsor. For now, let's get back to this incredible conversation with Tom. So take us to that next chapter then. Now we're waking up on race day. It is the 27th of July, 2021. It is the big day. Do you remember it almost like a blur, or is it a day you remember in high detail? What's it even feel like?
It's really interesting because it's such an odd experience. I try and explain it to people. People who, maybe parents who have kids that swim, or people who swam when they're younger, or someone who did a sport that's really demanding, requires a lot of hours. You know, I was up at 5 a.m. before school, swimming every day and after school for my entire school life, for 15 years, the whole time when I went to university, this entire time, because I was constantly saying, right, I'm going to see how far I can push myself. How far can I go? What is my ceiling? You know, and if my ceiling genuinely had been a national medalist, I put my hands up and say I did everything I possibly could. This is my physiological ceiling that I've hit. If my ceiling had been qualifying for a Europeans team or a Commonwealth team, that's my ceiling. And everyone does have their ceiling, you know, and their potential that they can fulfill. And I do genuinely believe you can put your hands up and say, I completely fulfilled my potential. Then you can sleep easy at night, and there's real honour in that. But I just kept going, and my ceiling was, okay, I can qualify for the Olympics. Well, how well can I do at the Olympics? And I woke up on the morning of that final and I thought, well, this is essentially an opportunity for me to see how far, what is my absolute ceiling, you know? And when you train for 15 years and it comes down to 1 minute and 44 seconds, it's a bit of a bizarre ratio. You know, some footballers might get a couple Champions League finals, or maybe even a couple World Cups in their careers, or, you know, how many 90-minute games they get through a career. But we're in a sport where you get an opportunity, maybe two in your career, you know, that are unhampered and that you can really go for it. So I woke up on that morning and I tried not to think about the gravity of the situation, and that, because if I'd gone in, that's just so overwhelming, isn't it? Right, I've trained for 15 years. What you do in the next 2 minutes is going to dictate your life for the next 20 years. You know, I wouldn't be sat here having this podcast with you, you know, if things hadn't quite gone to plan, because unfortunately, the person who comes sixth at the Olympics doesn't get interviewed. They also don't make a career or an earning. Very rare in the sport. Swimming, you know, they're not fortunate enough to be able to start a swim school, and well, you know, they very much may be able to, but to use the name of being Olympic champion to do that. So the actual weight of you know, what's on the line for that final, I think I look back on it and I'm surprised I wasn't more nervous, you know, and more actually how daunting it is that what in the next 2 minutes is going to hold. But I woke up on the morning, I'd done the heat and the semi-final and they'd gone well. I knew I was in good form. I knew that something special was going to happen. There were morning finals in Tokyo because of the broadcasting rights for America. And I went through my normal process, and that's something I always come back to, exactly the same routine. So it's the same morning routine I've done since I was swimming here at Maidenhead. When I was a kid, it was the same thing I've done at all the kind of the prep meets leading up to it. There was one moment in the warm-up pool where I was going through my normal race warm-up, did some pace 50s, so I thought, I feel really good. My coach was like, you look mint, you know, all this kind of normal stuff, pretty low level, keeping it calm. I did one swim, and it did hit me for 1 second what was about to happen, and I got quite terrified. I got quite worried and a bit overwhelmed, to be completely honest with you. I don't think I've actually ever told anyone this, but I did get pretty scared, and it took quite a lot of mental fortitude to really put that to the back of my mind. And the way I did that was just focusing purely on the routine that was in front of me. So all I was thinking about was, what's the next drill I'm going to do? And is my hand position in the right position for this drill? Where's my race suit in my bag? Do I know exactly when I'm going to put that on? So I didn't give myself space to consider the implications of what was about to happen, essentially. And I just went back to that routine.
And scared of what, if you don't mind me asking? The pressure of, as you said, the weight on your shoulders of...
Yeah, the pressure. And I think I keep coming back to this because sometimes I consider whether I love winning more, or I'm scared of losing more. And I don't know which one's me and which one's the right answer. I'd be interested in asking you that, actually. When you step on the line for your challenges, what makes you nervous? You know,
one of my biggest motivators is failure.
Yeah.
Because I care deeply about what I do. I feel a personal responsibility to everything around me to do these adventures, but also as they grow. And when I first started them, I used to get really nervous at the start lines. And again, I'd love to ask you this, but I used to get really scared and nervous. Oh my God, I have one opportunity today. I have to do this. And then I thought, as I get older and more experienced, and maybe I get my first few world records, I'll build confidence. Yes, I built confidence, but my nerves and fear grew too, because suddenly I had more on the line. I had more people watching. I had bigger sponsors on board. I had the responsibility of family and parents, or whatever it may be. And actually, it's getting worse with every challenge. So what I've learned now is to embrace it. So that pressure, that weight on my shoulders, which is not as great as yours, but in the moment feels as tough. Completely. I embrace it because it's actually, it's a motivator. Because if you push it away, it drains your energy. If you embrace it, it's your fuel. Turn that fuel into fire. Let it become your focus. What would you say?
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? I've watched loads of talks about it. I find it fascinating, actually. And those moments, those real kind of like important cornerstones in your life that kind of make or break and really change the course of your life. And I can't remember who was talking about it. I think it might have been an Olympic rower, but they were basically saying that right before the start line, before they began their race, there's a weird contrast, because whatever happens, the sun will rise the next day. It's sport. We get on. My family's not at risk. We're all safe. We're all happy. The people that love you are going to love you because of you, not because of how well you do at sport. But at the same time, what you do in the next 2 minutes has the chance to outlive you and has the chance to change the course of your life. And I think if you can balance that and take the positives from that, then you're a force to be reckoned with, absolutely. But for me, on the day, it does go back to routine. Went through my routine. I knew exactly what I was doing. Everything was perfect. I knew what I was wearing. You had my race suit all set out. It was absolutely spot on. I went into, my coach Dave at the time. He would do the prep and stuff. He'd keep it light and loose and stuff. But he's told me. I went for dinner with him last night. He's told me he was really nervous. But you can't. You're the coach. The athlete has to see you as a source of calm and confidence as well. He walked me down to the cool room, and this is kind of the chance where the coach says the last few things to you before they'll see you after the race. And I remember so clearly, he just said to me, "You're ready, go out and get what you deserve." You're ready. It wasn't like, make sure you breathe in, every third one and you got 4 fly kicks on this. It was like, you're ready, go out and get what you deserve. And it kind of completely calmed me. And I went into the cool room. And you line up, I'm getting goosebumps for talking about this. You line up with the 7 other guys. I was in the cool room with obviously my friend, my colleague Duncan. And I remember you kind of looking at all the athletes' faces. And there was one swimmer, there's a South Korean swimmer called Sunwoo Hwang, who's an incredible athlete. And I remember him looking quite nervous, as I remember. And I was next to him, and I was kind of taking that into consideration about how he might swim his race. It might meant he go out really quick, and he did go out really quick in that race. And then I remember you kind of get closer, and they say 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds. The event in front of you is finished, and then they say, "Right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the final of the men's 200 meters freestyle." They start reading the lanes out, and then they go lane 6. Representing Great Britain, Tom Dean. And my coach Dave always says, address the crowd, whatever you're feeling, however nervous you're feeling, look up and address the crowd. He had 2 athletes that swam at London 2012 in front of a home crowd, and they were quite nervous, I think. And he said, I don't care how you're feeling, make sure you address the crowd, because of how it looks and also how it will make you feel inside. You can trick your mind and your body, can't you, slightly? So I walked out, slapped my chest, addressed the crowd like I always do. And then you asked whether it was a blur. The race was a blur, because I always say, like, when you get in these fine moments of the prep being perfect and the taper being perfect, once you hit the water, your body knows what to do. It does the work for you. And when you're that fresh and you're that well trained, you kind of just float that first 50. I remember turning it halfway and seeing Duncan on my right, not as close to me as I thought he was going to be. He was sat a little behind me. The Korean swimmer went out really quickly, but I had to have absolute confidence that he wasn't going to hold it. So I just kind of sat close to him. And then the last 15 meters, I remember just thinking, get your head down, get your hand on the wall, get your head down, get your hand on the wall. Touched, turned, and I saw, the number 1 next to my name. And to this day, I can't quite explain that feeling, because it's almost dreamlike, in the ratio, like I said, of 15 years compared to 2 minutes, where everything that race went perfect. I couldn't have asked for a better race. It's funny, even now when I struggle maybe with injury or illness or setbacks or swims not being quite perfect, I always think, whatever happens, that is locked in as Olympic champion for the rest of my life. And that just is something that, is quite special.
It's history. Should be very proud.
Thank you.
And that moment of achieving your dream, for those out there who maybe never experienced that or felt that yet, what does it actually feel like? I hear some athletes say it becomes a nightmare because, they lose that purpose, or does it actually give you confidence to keep going, to fight again, to want to experience it again? What does it do that moment to win an Olympic gold medal?
It's a really good question. I think it changes you. It definitely changes you as a person. It changes how you perceive yourself, I think, and that can be a positive or a negative. People come up to me and they say, "Oh, you're the swimmer," or "Oh, your brother's the swimmer," or whatever. So that's what you're known as, and that's incredible. I used to, do school projects on the Olympics when I was a little kid. I did, a whole profile on Michael Phelps when I was in year 4 because he was my hero. I wanted to be an Olympic athlete my whole life. I think that's the coolest thing ever, and the fact I get to do it, I think, is so cool. I really, really love it. But understanding that that's who you're going to be now, basically, and you're going to forever be known, if, for whatever happens, if anything, for some reason I appeared in the news, for whatever reason, that would be next to my name. That's one of those moments in your life, and people often get it in their professional careers, maybe down the line, if they get a certain job in high office or whatever, they know that that's going to be, and mine happened to come at 21, and I do hope I'll go into other industries and do stuff where I can really, reach peaks again, but that's quite a cool thing and a different thing and everything that comes along with it. Incredible amounts of pressure every time you race going forward. The way you have to conduct yourself, the opportunities, for good or worse that come your way, how people interact with you, how your friends and family and places you find yourself, rooms you find yourself sat in that you were never expecting. A multitude of different things come your way, positive and negative. But I think it's kind of like people who say, what happens when someone gets really, really rich? It kind of accentuates features about that person. If someone's greedy and they get loads of money and they become really successful, they become more greedy. I think, like my mum said, if you can be humble, respectful to everyone you meet, really hospitable. I think if you can stay grounded and level-headed, if you can keep your ego in check as much as you possibly can, regardless of what comes your way, those things, hopefully features just kind of get accentuated. And I think if I ever find myself maybe drifting one way too much, I do always check in with myself and remind myself that before that moment, I was just, a 19-year-old kid that loved swimming and would kind of train really, really hard. And I always try and come back to that.
It's incredible advice, right? Mums always know best.
Yeah, absolutely.
My mum always tells me, do the thing, right? Because we talk about the distractions of starting business things or sponsorship, whatever it is, but, do the thing, right? If someone isn't willing to help you or partners aren't coming on board to support you, they're not the right partner. Do the thing, and you're clearly doing that. And the advice your mum shared of being humble, I mean, it's our first time meeting. We follow each other a little bit on Instagram, but so much humility there. You speak so well. You're an incredible role model for the next generation. And I believe that both inside and outside of sports. You mentioned there about the pressure of now swimming as a gold medalist. Who are you competing against now? Are you competing against yourself or others when you step into a pool?
It's tough. I think a real big turning point for me was the following year. I went to the World Championships in 2022, and once again, I didn't know my ceiling. I was Olympic champion, but could I back that up and be world champion? Could I be world and Olympic champion on the 200 freestyle? Is my ceiling even higher? There was a swimmer coming up through the ranks, a Romanian swimmer, who's an incredible freestyler called David Popovici. I mean, he's one of the best swimmers in the world. And I took the race to him in that World Champs final, and I came up short. I got a bronze medal. The next World Championships I went to, I got a silver medal by 2/100ths of a second. The finest margin ever in that event in the World Champs. And I've come up just a smidge short of getting that world champion. To add to my thing, and sometimes think maybe that's my ceiling. Sometimes I think, maybe I got all my luck in that Olympic final, but then, I'm not a massive believer in luck. You go over this stuff in your head so many times. So, at the end of the day, I'm in a competitive sport where I'll line up next to the person next to me and they want to take what's yours. That's how I've been taught. They're after what is yours, and you need to go and take it from them, basically. You need to go and get, like my coach said, go out and get what you deserve. But we're also in a sport where no one can come into your lane. I'm not going to get tackled by some, rugby player coming off the side of the, pitch that I don't see out the corner of my eye. No one's going to, slide tackle me or anything like that. All I can affect is the piece of water that's in front of me. You can absolutely have your blinkers on. So it's a weird sport where you really have to kind of balance the both. But I know what I'm capable of. I know, like I said, sometimes I've been honest with myself and said you came up short there because you maybe didn't give enough in that session, and I that's something I hate more than anything else, is knowing I've got more left in the pool. So it's constantly a battle within and constantly a competition against yourself. And that competition against yourself, when it comes to fruition, you're pitted in lanes with other, blokes doing exactly the same thing. But it's all within, I think.
It's fascinating to learn a little bit more about your mindset, and you speak very honestly about it, which I'm sure we all greatly appreciate. You're wearing proudly there your Tom Dean swim school uniform, whatever you want to call it. This is now one of your big priorities. Why do you feel that responsibility to the younger generation, and what is the Tom Dean Swim School in the first place? Yeah,
well, so it's a really great question. I think it kind of comes into the question of how you see yourself and what kind of person you want to be, what legacy maybe do you want to leave behind, and that was always a big driving factor of, I was so fortunate to get a platform off the back of my sports performance and my performance at the Olympic Games. How can I use this to the most beneficial, advantage of the most people? Well, what am I really passionate about? What's given me everything that's allowed me to have all these amazing opportunities? Well, it is the sport of swimming, and it was an idea actually straight off the back of the Tokyo Olympics, because I had this massive audience, I say massive audience, but for a swimmer, it's a massive audience, and a few more followers on Instagram and people reaching out to you and writing letters and school kids messaging you and, people coming up to you in swimming clubs and stuff like that. And I remember thinking, how can I really use this for a positive effect and have a positive impact, and something that will, similar to my Olympic achievements, will outlive me and outlast my competitive career. And I landed on, well, it's spreading this skill of water safety and the joy that I've always had in the water and that ability to learn to swim. And I thought, right, I would love to start a swimming school and impact the youngest people, who are just taking those first steps in the sport of swimming. And from a wider standpoint, because it's, if these kids and our members want to go on and be Olympic athletes, incredible. If they just want to be safe and confident in the water, and families want to take their kids, incredible as well. I think it's a life skill. It's the only sport that can save your life at the end of the day. If you find yourself in a pool or you find yourself doing a 10K in the other side of the world, it's a really, really important skill. So I really wanted to start the Tom Dean Swim School.
Which you're going to join me on one day, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
There we go.
I'll see you there. Yeah, I might need to, put a wetsuit on.
No wetsuits allowed in the ocean.
You're not, are you? Yeah.
Guys, sorry, please continue.
Bulk off a little bit. And that was always my plan. And one thing that sprung to mind straight away is actually building the team around me to do it, because, I know how to swim a 200 freestyle. I don't know how to run a successful, positive, impactful swim school. So building the team around me is really, really important. So there's a team of 5 of us that run it. I was really keen I spoke about my agent, Hugo, who's been a business partner of mine, someone who's guided me since Tokyo. I was very, very keen to get him on board. And then I wanted to really start here at my home in Maidenhead, start at the pool and the centre that started my swimming journey. So I work with 3 guys who kind of run this centre, run others, and that's Mark Campovery, it's Austin Swain, and it's Adrian Morehouse. Now, Austin Swain is an incredible athlete and in his own right, and has been heavily involved in the swimming club here, alongside Adrian Morehouse as well, another Olympic champion from I believe 88. He won the 100 breaststroke, and I brought together this kind of super team of guys, and I sat them all down and I said, look, this is what I want to do. I really want to kind of create a legacy, and I think they saw the vision. They really, really saw the vision, and they've got incredible business acumen that I did not have. I'd never been involved in business. I was very much at the start of my journey, but I knew what I could bring to the swim school. And it's been incredible. I mean, we've been up and running for 18 months now. The journey has been fantastic. And so, this might sound slightly selfish, but so rewarding for me, and seeing the impact that we're having on young people's lives at the end of the day. We do a kind of a monthly catch up, and we sit down with our teachers. And often they'll tell stories about kind of positive impacts, and maybe a child who was struggling and how they took maybe a different route to kind of get them through the stage, and how they taught them that skill. And honestly, nothing brings me more joy than hearing these stories. That's why I love doing talks in schools. That's why I love, running the Tom Dean Swim School and growing the Tom Dean Swim School. So it's been fantastic. It's an incredible journey. It's something I'm really, really passionate about. I want to keep pushing. I want to spread the word about water safety and about what we're doing to every child around the country. Every child, every person in this country and around the world should be water safe and know how to swim. It's so important.
I agree. And I can feel the passion too. And we had Lennox Lewis on this show a few weeks ago, another Olympic gold medalist. And he started these incredible training camps for young boxers out in Jamaica. But that was after you retired. You're doing this at your peak. So I commend you highly for it. You're an incredible role model for the younger generation. And I want to say thank you so much for joining me on the show. I think there's something quite special from different worlds. There's a little bit of synergy between us as two redheads. We have 3 Olympic golds and 3 world records, although your gold medals are far more impressive. Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining me on If You Can. Hi everyone, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode with the one and only Tom Dean, one of my favourite conversations ever, both on and off the podcast. For someone who's achieved so much, he remains so humble, so eloquent, so just inspiring. And actually, when we finished, we said, I think we're going to have to do a part 2 in the future, because we could have spoken for hours. So let us know in the comments if you'd like to see a part 2 and what you think I should ask Tom in the future. But I just want to say a big thank you to him, to his whole team, for welcoming us into his swim club, for being so kind and generous with his time too. Thank you guys, really, really do appreciate it. But of course, we can't finish any If You Can episode without Bob's Everyday Hero, our weekly segment to finish the show, sponsored by Bob, where we give a shout out and a thank you and a big well done to one of our listeners, to someone who's achieved something amazing recently, big or small. It could be anything, a work goal, a personal goal, maybe it's a moment of kindness. You just have to drop us an email at louis@ifyoucanhq.com. That's louis@ifyoucanhq.com. And each week we go through the emails, pick one out, read it out, and we send out a Bob Shower Pack to support you on your own journey. And this week's email comes from Paul, and I'm going to read his message to you now. Hi Louis, I've been working on a fitness goal this year after struggling with my health for a while. I didn't go all in, just small, consistent changes each week, and it slowly started to add up. There are still days where motivation dips and old habits creep back in, but I'm in a much better place than I was a few months ago. Listening to Apollo's episode last week reminded me that progress doesn't come from one big moment. It comes from showing up repeatedly. It's given me that reminder to stay patient, to keep going and not undo the work I've already put in. Cheers, Paul. Well, Paul, thank you first of all for listening and supporting If You Can. Thank you for dropping us an email. You're absolutely right. I've experienced that firsthand with my adventures, with my training over the last 5 years, where motivation does dip. Motivation isn't real. It's not reliable. And what I found is actually your emotions, whether they're high or low, they're out of our control. If we look at them like an ocean, they go up and down. But what we do have control on is our decisions. And like you said there, turning up, making those small, consistent changes, that's the key to everything, to success in your training, in life and business, whatever it may be. All of the guests so far on the show, we've had 15 guests now come on, have all shared the same thing. So Paul, keep going. We wish you the very best with your journey, with your health, and we're going to send you out a Bob Shower Pack to support you on your own journey. To everyone who's listened to this episode, to any of our recent episodes, thank you for your support. It allows us to continue our mission of delivering great guests with even greater lessons. Please do support us on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube. We're also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And we'll see you next week for the next episode of If You Can. Bye now.